Shane Stacks on the radio.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening on Saturday, April 25th at 1 p.m. Central on 101.1 FM, The Answer, in the Little Rock / Central Arkansas area, or if you're listening to the live stream at 1011fmtheanswer.com, or if you're listening by podcast or on Krypton Radio or on YouTube, or one of the many other ways the show goes out after the broadcast or the radio broadcast. I'm just glad to have you. I love radio. I love podcasts. I love flapping my lips at a microphone. So today it's going to be a little bit different. Every now and then I like to just fire up the mic and just talk about a subject that's interesting to me. And I usually have a guest or, something like that. But every now and then I just like to just fire it up, sit here with a microphone and talk to you, my listeners. And sometimes that's, just the way I want to go. And that's what we're going to do this week. And this week's topic, the main topic, is going to be how to be a quote unquote good DM, parentheses, and how to know if you are. And of course, DM, can mean GM, game master, storyteller, castle keeper, narrator, what referee, whatever the role is for that tabletop role-playing game that you're playing. DM, has been around so long that it's used interchangeably by a lot of people, but DM is dungeon master, DM for short. And then also the DM from the cartoon is short. See what I wonder if that's why they did that. DM for short. I wonder if that's why. Anyway, that's a major tangent and mental digression. I'm going to get right off of there. Anyway, GM, storytellers, castle keepers, whatever. This will apply to being that role at a tabletop role-playing game. And tabletop these days, of course, can be online or like we talked last week, by email even, but tabletop is a genre of role-playing games that's not being played as a video game, basically. So there we go. They all started tabletop. D&D started as a tabletop role-playing game. The books, the dice, all that good stuff. So before that, I'm going to do a small, and it's not even a rant, it's just a point I want to make that I hear these days. On one hand, I understand where they're coming from, but on the other hand, it kind of rankles me and doesn't set well with me. There's a trend that it's not necessarily a wrong trend if it's applied correctly. But if this trend is stated to be the absolute truth, then we have a problem. What it is this idea that if you have a fantasy setting, okay, let me be clear here. It's not a real world. It's not cyberpunk. It's not sci-fi. It's not futuristic. It's not, some action RPG that's set in now or the near future. We're talking a fantasy setting. It could be your typical Tolkien fantasy, or it could be, just your generic D&D fantasy or Forgotten Realms or something else. There's so much of it out there. It could be old pulp fiction, Conan, whatever. And there is just a tremendous amount of precedent and literature and gaming resources where certain races are good or they're evil, and there's no in between. A lot of times it's because an evil god made the race. Remember, we're talking about a fantasy setting. Or sometimes it's about because a good god made the race. And we're using good and evil basically with the D&D Enlightenment system, right? You got two axes. You got good, neutral, evil, and then you have, chaotic and lawful. and then and chaotic, neutral, and lawful, right? And you put those two axes together. So I'm going to talk in terms of that alignment system since, we're talking about tabletop role-playing games. Well, there's this idea out there that if you take like orcs is the classic example, right? There's so many stories out there where orcs are just evil. And let's look at Tolkien. His orcs were evil. Goblins and orcs and Uruk-hai and all that. And I think his goblins and orcs were interchangeable, but the Uruk-hai were a different, I think almost like an engineered race of super orc. And they were evil. They were just evil. They were the bad guy. There was no nature versus nurture. None of that. They were just evil. And there's this thought now that if you do that, that you're somehow stunted in your thinking or limited in your thinking or outdated in your thinking. I'm going to expand on that a little bit. When I first recorded this, it was Friday, April 24th. And I had simply heard a discussion on a podcast that it was sort of outdated thinking. But in the week or so since, this discussion seems to have really kind of exploded out there, at least on Twitter or maybe on other podcasts and that sort of thing. So I guess I was hearing the echoes of a larger discussion. And I've actually had people say to me on Twitter that if somebody has a race in their fantasy campaign that is all good or all evil or whatever, that they're not having any responsibility to society and they're actually being harmful. Because they were having this discussion and I said, there's other ways to think about this and it could come off as, elitist or snobbish or arrogant to say, if your races are done a certain way in your game, then, you're just outdated in your thinking. And of course that didn't go well. They went on to say that basically you can either play your game in racist mode or non-racist mode. And you're just demonstrating a moral choice in how you play your game with your own friends at your table. It's like it's either racist or non-racist and there's no in between. And that's a lot of what I'm taking exception to is it just has to be this. It has to be their way or it's wrong. And they also went on to say that, they were judging me for saying, why can't it be both and instead of either or? Said you're hanging on to harmful concepts that do not help the RPG community. So there's a lot there. They're basically saying if you choose to have a game where all your elves are good or all your halflings are neutral or all your orcs are evil or even make it your orcs are good and your elves are evil, whatever, that you're not only are you outdated, but you're harmful. You're not living up to your moral obligation to society. So I'm actually glad that I chose to have this discussion in my podcast because it seems to be an even stronger, larger debate out there, discussion than I realized. Just wanted to have that footnote to add that, even after I initially recorded what I'm about to talk about, there's more stuff going on out there and there's people literally accusing me and others of being harmful. And saying, well, if they're saying when people invoke the RPG community, what they're saying is if you play RPG games, then you're opted in to a community and you have to follow that community's moral rules, which I'll let you decide for yourself if you feel that's true or not. But anyway, back to my thoughts on this overall discussion. And I just really have a problem with that because if you want to have, I think it should be both and, not either or. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you have a role-playing setting or a game or a group where they want more nuanced, complex storytelling, and they want to be able to take that baby orc out of their environment, and raise them as a good person, and that orc becomes good, that's all fine. I'm not against that. But at the same time, if I want to have a setting, a fantasy setting, remember, where orcs are evil, period. They're just evil. They were made evil. They're made bad. They're born bad. They're bad. They're born Nazis, right? They're just bad. And that's because there's cosmological forces at work in this fantasy setting that have set it that way. Like I think I've talked about it on the show before. In some settings, I see the alignment as being one of the laws of the universe. You got gravity, you got this, that, and the other, and then you got alignment. Now, in our real world, you could argue that that's not the case. There's people who are religious or not, or whatever, believe in God or a gods or whatever, or not a gods, but you know what I mean? A group of gods. And some could argue that our world has basic universal morality or not. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a fantasy setting. And I think it's perfectly okay for the type of storytelling that you want to tell to say that this race of whatever, and you could also say that the elves are good. They're inherently good. Or these drow are inherently bad. And yeah, you could have this very rare one-off that leads to interesting storytelling, like Drizzt, right? Drizzt Do'Urden, the classic drow who became a hero. I get all that. But what I'm saying is one of the things that made his story so fascinating was that he came from a race that's evil, right? Not, like it could go either way, but no, they were evil. So again, my main point is not that every fantasy setting should have up or down absolute morality with their races. But if people want to, and I am one of those people that not every campaign or adventure I'm in has to be that way, but I don't mind it. It's just time for a good old-fashioned fantasy romp and to have some fun. That's okay, and that people aren't being limited or somehow damaging other people or bringing racism into their game. Because that's what it really comes down to. It's like, well, you're being a racist. Well, no, I'm not. I mean, we're just playing a game where in this game, in this fantasy game, in this fantasy setting, this race was created bad and they're just bad. And maybe that race was created good and they're just good. And that's all there is to it. Because there's like cosmological forces and or deities in this fantasy setting behind the scenes that have made it this way. But at the same time, again, I can't stress enough that if people want more complex storytelling where the orcs aren't inherently bad, and so you want to get into complex storytelling, that's fine. I mean, like one thing I can think of is like Numenera, Monty Cook's games. They usually have not quite a twist, but they have like, if you like, well, let's just go wipe out the bad guys. But then you find out if you wipe out the bad guys, maybe they weren't really the bad guys or it causes something else. So it's a more complex storytelling. And that's fine if you want to do that. I'm all for that. There are times, I use this analogy pretty regularly in my regular life regularly in my life and here on the show sometimes. Sometimes I want like a steak. I want the best steak. I want the most complex tasting, flavorful, seasoned, cooked perfect steak meal I can get. But other times, man, I just want to go throw down on a fast food burger. And it just depends on my mood or what I want to do or what the people I'm with, what they're up for. And there is people talk about, well, you don't want to bring racism into this and that and the other. I mean, for me, now, I guess some of it is the motivation of why people would want to play games. For me, I mainly play role-playing games, whether it's tabletop or video game or whatever, for escapism. I want some fun. I want to get away from the real world. I want to go out, beat up bad guys or whatever, and level up. And, unlock areas I couldn't get to before in other parts of the story. And generally, if I'm in a campaign or an ongoing thing, that's usually what I want to do. Now, I love playing new systems and new settings in one-shots or a short series. I love it. I love complex. I love different storytelling. I love all. I want you to challenge me and give me conflicting gray area decisions and all that. I love that at conventions and at one-shots, and I'll run those games for people because I want to learn new systems or a different kind of thing. But my bread and butter for tabletop role-playing is your classic good versus evil. It's all very clearly defined, and that's okay. So what I want is for people maybe to step back if they're thinking, well, if you have races, they're all good or all evil, then you're just, I really don't like this. I mean, this was literally said, I've heard this said that people like, if you do that, you're outdated in your thinking. And that is a very arrogant, snobbish way to look at it, in my opinion. What I think is a better and more respectful way to approach it is to say, well, I prefer a more complex, nuanced thing. Like I want the War and Peace. I want the complex story, the nuances, this and that. I don't want the novella where Conan's taking people's heads off. But there's a market for both. And neither are inherently good or inherently bad, ironically enough, given the topic of this discussion. So I just wanted to get that off my chest. If you want to, if you want to play good versus evil and there's no, you go in there and you wipe out that tribe of orcs, you haven't done anything bad, right? They're evil, right? Or if you rescue the elves, you haven't accidentally let people survive who are going to go do bad things because they're good. It's okay for that. There's room for that kind of storytelling. Just like there's room for storytelling where the orcs could somehow be the good guys and the elves are the bad guys, even though on the surface it may not seem that way. So that's what I'm arguing for here, is to not be sort of arrogant and say, well, if your people are, all good or all evil, then that's just really, simplistic and outdated. No, it's just serving that story. It's just serving that story. So, and there's room for more nuanced storytelling, but depending on the story you're telling, it may not be a nuanced time. Like the original Star Wars story is not time for nuance. It's space opera, space fantasy. They're the good guys. They're the bad guys. And I'm not talking about like you could have morally great characters, right? Like Han Solo or Lando Calrissian. But what set up the whole thing was that it was just purely good versus evil. And that's one of my beefs with Rogue One. I love Rogue One. I think Rogue One is an amazing movie. But one thing I didn't like was they introduced the gray area of the rebellion, like at the beginning where, he has to shoot his friend and all of that stuff. I'd rather not have that in my Star Wars. But other people want it in there, that's fine. So I'm not going to say, well, you're stupid if you want that in your Star Wars. Although I imagine there's people out there saying, no, you can't, it's not realistic for the rebellion to be all good guys. Well, I'm not looking for realism. That's the point. I'm looking for escapism. Because the real world is very rarely an up or down, morally unambiguous situation. So it's nice to escape from that and to have some fun. Now, you may play role-playing games for a different reason, and if you do, that's fine. Or you may play them for the same reason I do, but you want more complexity, and that's fine. I just really, really bothered. I think that it could have some possibly far-reaching negative impact on people to state bluntly that if you're going to have like orcs that are evil, that's outdated. Because that's insinuating a lot. Anyway, all right. So that's it on that. It was just something I want to talk about. I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I'd love to have your thoughts. You could tweet me at Shane Plays, ShanePlays, Shane Plays. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to shift over. Thanks for listening to that, by the way. I'd love to have your thoughts. I'm going to shift over into this how to be a good DM and how to know if you are. So I wrote this almost 2 years ago. I see that I started writing it on May 4th. May the 4th be with you. May 4th of 2018. And I kept meaning to make a blog post out of it, and I haven't done it yet. I need to. Or maybe, I don't think I made a blog post out of it yet, but I was thinking, what do I want to do this week? And this came to mind, and I thought this would be a perfect topic for this week's show. And I get asked a lot, and I know there's a lot of people out there that genuinely like, I want to be a DM, I want to be a better DM or GM or whatever, or I want to start DMing, and, what do I do? So I hope that both new DMs or GMs or hopeful DMs and GMs or people who have been doing it 40 years, maybe you can get something out of it. I don't know. And I want to preface this. I'm not an expert. I like to DM. It's my preferred role at the table. It's, I do like to play on occasion, and that's fun, but I just really enjoy DMing. It just fits my personality or whatever. And I like to provide that story and entertainment for people and seeing everybody having a good time and, watching all the craziness happen. But I want to speak for a moment to either new or hopeful DMs. I see a lot of comments on like Twitter, Facebook, or whatever. Hear people talking on podcasts. People are like, well, I don't know if I could do this. And they really put a lot of pressure on themselves. And, or they'll be like, I'm getting ready for my first game tomorrow. And I just don't know. I don't know if I can do this. And, I don't remember that being a dynamic when I was growing up. Maybe it was, and it's just more evident now that people are tweeting about it or something. But people are just like, you want to be the DM? Okay, I'll be the DM. And it just wasn't that big of a deal. And people would DM or not. And it was fine. So I guess what I'm saying is don't feel like you got to put so much pressure on yourself to be this amazing DM. And don't go look at like Critical Role. I mean, that stuff's all great. Matthew Mercer and all that. But those are voice actors that are providing an entertainment product. They'll even admit that. Like, this is an entertainment product. It's not pure D&D or whatever game they happen to play. I mean, they're playing with the rules and all that, but those are professional entertainers providing a product. So don't put yourself at the table thinking you got to be all that. And maybe you can be all that, but you got to get there. I mean, nobody gets amazing. You might have talent, but nobody learns the ropes and, learns their strengths and weaknesses and what works and what doesn't for them and for their players on the first session. One of the points I'll make here in a little bit is everyone's there to have fun. So just roll with it. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. It's okay. Just have a good time. And, if you feel like that you're DMing and you're like under the floodlights and there's the entire world's looking at you and you're panic attacking and getting stage fright or something, it's just, you're putting too much pressure on yourself. Seriously. I mean, as much as I love tabletop role-playing games, it's just a game, and there'll be other games after that one. So if that one goes great, fine. If it goes bad, oh well. Get up and get at it again. Or if you DM or GM like several games in a row and you're just not enjoying it and your players aren't enjoying it, it might be that the DMing isn't your jam. Or it might be you just need more practice. But I see people, man, they just put so much pressure on themselves. And remember, it's a game. People are there to have fun. So, and your players are part of that. It's not all on you. Your players need to come with a good attitude and want to have fun. And if they do, you will have fun. So that doesn't mean that you don't have to bring anything to the table as a DM. I'm just saying it's not purely on you. This is a group effort. So another thing I want to share before I get into, some of my tips on how to be a good DM. And remember, at the end of this, I will share a foolproof way. You will absolutely know, guaranteed 100% whether you're a good DM or not. It's foolproof. I guarantee it. And I'll share that at the end. And I'm about to share my most important quote unquote rule. But before that, I just want to say, I would encourage you as a DM or GM to think of yourself as you are a player at the table that, just like everybody else, you're there to have fun too. Okay. You're a player in the game, but you're in a specialized role. You're not there. And it's so much of the advice I hear is like, do this for your players, do this, And a lot of that advice is very good, but there's a mindset I want you to consider. You are not there to be a vending machine and give the players whatever they want when they push a button or cater to every little expectation and whim. And I know people are like, wow, I can't believe you just said that, because that runs counter to so much of the thought out there. But, you know, if you do that, if you're just there to cater to your players, every little expectation and whim and every little demand they have and hope they have, that'll end up becoming an exasperating servile drudgery. I guarantee you, you will not be having fun. So you want to collaborate with your players. Definitely collaborate with your players. Take their backstories into account and their characters into account and the personality of the player, not just the character. Take all that into account. Give everybody time to shine. But you don't have to just give in to every little thing they want. And man, I know that there's people like, wow, I can't believe you're saying that, but it needs to be said. So, and depending, and a lot of it comes to your group. If you as a DM get satisfaction out of just constantly being a customized storyteller to your players, and they kind of end up dictating what the game is, and if that makes you happy, then fine. But I don't think the vast majority of people out there are like that. And I know that one thing that'll make me not want to come back to the table is if, you know, players are being demanding or unappreciative or, you know, trying to constantly hijack what's going on and make it just about them and that sort of thing. So just keep that in mind. And I'm not implying all players out there are bad. I mean, there's a lot of great players out there. 90%, 99%, whatever of DMs and players are great. Just don't let the small few run it for you. But again, keep this in mind. You are a player too. Okay. You're in a specialized role, but you're at the table to also have fun. And if you're not having, and I'm not talking about just one session, like that wasn't fun, but if you're consistently not having fun and you've tried sincere, respectful attempts to change things or do something different to get back on a fun course, there's nothing wrong with saying, guys, gals, I'm just, I'm not enjoying as a DM and closing up the book and letting somebody else take a shot. So, or take a break. Sometimes taking a break and come back, can help as well. So, all right, I'm going to give the number one most important rule in being a DM. And then we'll take a break and I'll come back and get the rest of the stuff. So the most important rule, and this is all based on, I've been GMing in some form or fashion since the 80s, but as a consistent, constant, running a weekly game, this is based on 5 or 6 years, about 6 years of experience of just running a weekly game. But it also incorporates just experience playing and DMing here and there, back to the 80s even. But I don't pretend to be, the master DM. And, as with I do see it as a craft. I didn't even used to see it at that. When people talked about it being a craft, I thought they were being a little bit snooty. But no, it is a craft. There is definitely a craft to DMing. And I'm on my way, but I'm not there to being, the best I can be by any means. So here's the most important quote unquote rule in being a DM, according to Shane. Knowing the rules inside and out is not the most important thing to being a DM. It may not even be the second most important thing. All right. The most important thing is to keep moving with the story and making sure everyone is having fun. That's where it's at. It's taken me a lot of experience to get to this viewpoint. I mean, honestly, it has, because my natural instincts are to be all about the rules. So let me give you an example. When I first started running 5e, I barely knew it. I had picked up the starter set and they wanted more games running up at my friendly local game store. So I said, sure, I'll run D&D 5e. And I showed up and I started running Lost Mine and Phandelver. And I barely even knew, I hadn't played 4th edition. I was out of, I've been a long time RPG gamer, but I was out of the hobby for a few years. And so I completely missed 4e. And so I started running D&D 5e. I didn't even know how it differed really from previous editions. I was just relying on my knowledge of the various D&D editions and other RPGs I'd played, just that experience of knowing basically what an RPG game was. And I showed up at the game store with a bunch of players I had never met, and off we went. And it was fine. And we've had fun ever since, session after session. So we're gonna take a break. When we get back, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what do you do if you don't know a rule, and how to handle rules lawyers. I may have a different perspective on rules lawyers than many people do, and we'll talk about powerful tools that are in a DM's bag and other stuff. So stay tuned, and we will be back here in a moment after this word from our sponsors on Shane Plays Geek Talk. Are you a fan of thrilling adventure, daring suspense, and just a touch of romance? Cursova has you covered. Since 2016, Cursova has been publishing the very best in contemporary fantasy and science fiction, retro pulp, and for you D&D gamers, Appendix N style fiction. Based in Little Rock, you can pick up their flagship magazine locally or at Michael Tierney's The Comic Book Store on Treasure Hill Road or Collector's Edition on JFK in North Little Rock. Swing by one of Michael's stores and pick up an issue or find them on Amazon. CIRSOVA, doesn't start with a K, it starts with a C. CIRSOVA, Cursova Magazine. Check them out today. And speaking of Michael Tierney's comic book shops, comic book lovers, head to Michael Tierney's local comic book stores for the newest books on the shelves, plus a fantastic selection of back issues. Visit the comic book store on Treasure Hill Road in Little Rock and Collector's Edition on JFK Boulevard in North Little Rock. And don't forget to click on over to the wildstars.com. Michael Tierney knows comics. In addition to being in business for nearly 4 decades and publishing his own comic book series, The Wild Stars, for almost as long and still going, he has written multiple columns for comics magazines and is an Overstreet Price Guide advisor. Michael is also the author of the wildly successful, high-quality, 4-volume labor of love, the Edgar Rice Burroughs 100-Year Art Chronology. Remember, for all of your comic book needs with friendly service, make sure to visit the comic book store and Treasure Hill Road in Little Rock, Collector's Edition on JFK Boulevard in North Little Rock, and thewildstars.com to learn more. Tell them Shane Plays sent you. And last, but never, ever, ever least, I want to go ahead and throw out some love to Game Goblins. Some goblins are your friends. Game Goblins is Central Arkansas's premier retailer of Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40k, board games, card games, RPGs, miniatures, and hobby accessories. Call Game Goblins at 501-224-GAME or visit them online at GameGoblins.com. That's 501-224-GAME or GameGoblins.com. Conveniently located 1121 South Bowman, right on the corner of Bowman and Canis in West Little Rock, and staffed by friendly employees, Game Goblins has expanded their store size, and there's plenty of room for exciting inventory and tables for play space. You'll like that space because Game Goblins has gaming events every day of the week. For all of your gaming needs, I heartily recommend Game Goblins. Make sure to check out their customer loyalty program that rewards you based on your actual purchases. Game Goblins earns your business and keeps it. First-time customers, mention Shane Plays and receive $10 off your purchase of $50 or more. Tell them Shane Plays sent you. And folks, if you do visit any of my sponsors, please tell them that you hear about them on the show. That helps them know that their advertising money and the relationship we've built is time and money well spent.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/Shane Plays.
And we're back on Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. Thanks so much for joining. This is your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks for coming along for the ride. We're talking about how to be a good DM, dungeon master, or game master, or whatever term you use or whatever relates to the game you run. And we're going to get back to that list here in a moment. First, I want to throw out some quick show notes. First, you can always tweet me at Shane Plays. That's ShanePlays. And when the podcast version of this show goes out, so if you're listening to my podcast or on Krypton Radio or on YouTube or something, the show notes and links will be up at ShanePlays.com. That's ShanePlays.com. Last week's show is out there, And that was episode 219. We had RPGs by email and a little bit of Villains and Vigilantes discussion with Tom Heiss, who runs an excellent game, V&V by email. The podcast goes out on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, YouTube, and more. And last but never ever least, Shane Plays is carried on Krypton Radio. Krypton Radio is SciFi for your Wi-Fi. KryptonRadio.com. Just want to say a personal note to everybody out there. Hope you're doing well in the quarantine and the COVID. I know some places are looking at possibly easing restrictions the next couple of weeks, and then other places, my friend Morris in England, he's saying that they're being told till the end of the year. So it's different for everyone, but no matter what your situation is, I hope you're doing okay out there. And, I know it's not the most ideal of circumstances, but patience is our best mode at the moment. So we need to be Jedi and be patient while we wait for things to get a little bit back to normal. And remember, a lot of it isn't about us. It's not necessarily about our health, but it's about protecting people who are the most vulnerable. Okay, how about those tips and stuff for how to be a good DM or GM or whatever, and how to know if you are. Yeah, remember, at the end of this list, I will give a foolproof way of measuring whether you are a good DM or not. So anyway, right before the break, we talked about, that the most important thing is not necessarily knowing the rules inside and out. And that's true. That I don't think, no matter what game you're playing, unless there's always some exception out there somebody can throw at me. So I'll acknowledge there's some exception out there. But for the most part, you don't need to know the rules inside and out. You got the books there. You got other people at the table that know the rules, all that. You can look stuff up on the internet, whatever. Knowing the rules inside and out. Now, you want to have some idea of what you're playing and how the rules work, but you don't have to be a master. You have to be a walking encyclopedia of the rules to know the game. And sometimes new gaming groups are learning the rules together. So that's totally fine. So don't think you got to know I've been running D&D 5e for, 5-6 years now, and I don't know every little rule. I still have to look up some of the main rules sometimes. So that's just how it is. All right. And I said before the break that we talk about what, if you don't know a rule, you have options. And, like I said, you could look it up, online or in a book, but don't spend too much time doing this. Okay, one of the things that you don't want to do, unless it's a natural time for a break, say, hey, everybody take a quick break while I look this up. Unless that, you don't want to spend too much time looking up a rule. You want to keep things moving at the table, because it's one of two things is going to happen if you stop and dive into a book and spend more than a minute or two looking up a rule or something, some piece of lore or something. Either A, your players are going to get really bored and they're going to get pulled out of the game a little bit mentally, or B, they're going to start chatting with each other and again, losing focus on the game. And then when you try to get things going again, you've got to be the bad guy and, clap, hey, everybody, let's pay attention again now. And then you're kind of being the jerk for interrupting people's conversations and stuff like that. So, and it's just not good for flow at the table. Don't spend too much time. It's okay to look up a rule real quick or ask somebody else, hey, this rule, or can you look it up real quick? But don't halt the game more than a minute or two. And I think what is better, and what I tend to do, if it looks like it's going to take a while to look something up, just make a ruling on the spot and say you'll look up the actual rule later. And then later, if you look up the rule and find out that you ruled incorrectly, just explain that later. Say, hey, this one time we had to, come up with a rule real quick. I ruled this way, but the book says this. So either we're going to use the way I did it as a house rule from now on, or we're going to use the book's way or whatever. But the main thing is to be consistent. If you're consistent with your rulings and how you do the game, players will forgive just about anything, or may not even notice there's anything to forgive. But if the exact same situation comes up 3 times and you handle it differently each time, like I'm going to house rule it this time, I'm going to go by the book this time, I'm going to house rule it maybe even in a whole nother different way the next time, that will frustrate players. So try not to do that. Just be consistent. And if you need to reverse how you're doing things, explain why. I've done that more than once to say, hey, I know we've been playing it this way, but I've realized we've been playing it, differently than the book's written, and I want to do it the way the book says, so we're going to try that for a while or whatever. If you're open and upfront and honest and consistent, most players will hang in there with you. So let's talk about one of the most despised creatures in tabletop RPGs, and that is, dun, 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 the rules lawyer. So, as much as they're despised, and in some cases I think it's unfairly, I'm actually a fan of the rules lawyer. Let me tell you why. There's always one in every group. I don't think I've ever been in a group playing that didn't have a rules lawyer to some degree. And they can be counted on to know where a rule is, or what the rule is, or how to find it. So turn a negative into a positive, and use them to keep the game going, and give them some public affirmation for having spent the time to be so familiar. It works, trust me. So say, hey, let's say you got Elizabeth. Generic, I don't know an Elizabeth in my group or anything like that. But I don't know. Hey, Elizabeth, do you know that rule? And Elizabeth or Bob or whoever will either immediately, boom, yeah, I know that rule, and it's this, that, and the other. Or I know where to find it. And you let them, because they're good at that. They're good at being a walking encyclopedia. And you know what? One of the reasons that I'm empathetic to rules lawyers, now I'm not empathetic to rules lawyers who constantly want to argue and derail the fun of the game. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not fun. But I think even those type personalities can be guided to a more positive outcome in the game. Right? So, they have the knowledge, they want to use it, they want to see the rules work. And honestly, look, there are certain personality types, of which I'm one of them. Okay, I don't think I was ever a horrible rules lawyer and that I wanted to always argue the rules and disrupt the game. But I am a rules lawyer to the point that, I read the books, or especially when I was younger, they'd be like, oh, that's a really cool rule, or oh, that's how that works. Because when I was younger, high school, junior high, maybe just after graduation for a few years, I would buy role-playing games assuming I was never going to get them to play them or to get to play them, but I wanted to read how the rules worked and the settings worked and all that, and it was fascinating to me to see the erector set put together and all that. And there's people out there that you either hand them a book or you tell them to buy a book and say, learn this, and then they get to the table and somewhat rightfully so, they're frustrated when what they were told to learn is not what's happening at the table. And then if they bring stuff up, now I'm not talking about somebody who's just a real obnoxious jerk about it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the person that says I thought that was how this rule worked. Don't come down on them like a ton of bricks. Just say, okay, well, that's how it's written, but every table does it a certain way, and this is how we do it. And then if that person continually seems to be focused on the rules, say, you know what? I really need you at the table, and I need you to be my rules person that lets me know how the game is written. And then sometimes we'll go that way and sometimes we won't, but I really need to rely on you. And then that doesn't demean them. That doesn't diminish them. That lets them participate, and it's handy. Do you want to spend all the time looking up the rules, or do you want to have somebody at the table that's actually excited about it and loves to do it? Now, again, I'm not talking about somebody who will stop the game and throw a fit and throw a big argument because, they made their character with this feat in mind. And now because you've changed the game, the feat does it work the way they meant? And so there's a big, big fit being thrown. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not necessarily a rules lawyer. A rules lawyer in my mind is somebody who reads the rules, imprints on the rules, and then, defends the rules. Like, I thought this is how we were doing the rules. Okay, so use the rules lawyers to your advantage. Affirm them. Everybody at your table because people are people. People are a mix of things. Everybody's a mixed bag of strengths and weaknesses. So everybody at your table brings something good and something bad to the table. That's just how it is, because we're all human beings. So, maximize the positive, minimize the negative. And if somebody really wants to debate or argue something, say, hey, we'll talk about this after the game, but for right now, this is how I'm going to rule so we can move forward. Because everybody's not there at the table for you to have an argument with whoever. That's just not why people are there. They'll put up with it every now and then, but if it's a constant thing, it's going to be a drag for everybody. So, all right. Now this right here, I'm talk about one of the most powerful tools in a DM's bag. This is so powerful. This is such a powerful concept. You really need to listen to this. Just like any entertainment, think about this. If you go to a movie, or you go see a comedian, or you read a book, or you play a video game or whatever, you're there to have fun. So, like I said, it's just like if you go to a movie, concert, or whatever, see a comedian, the people that are going are wanting to have fun. So, just like with that entertainment thing, for the game, they will work with you mentally, both in ways they realize and in ways that they might not even notice, to make sure that they have fun. Now, if there's every now and then there's just going to be a bad game or a bad session or groups that don't work, but those are much, much, much the exception rather than the norm. 99 times out of 100, if not more, everybody's there to have fun, and they're going to work with you to have fun. So, it's just like they're going to, even without maybe not even realizing it, they're going to cut you some slack and mentally get out and help push to make sure that everybody's having fun, because it's a group effort. It's not just you. They're entertaining people. This is a group effort. If you go, think about it. If you go to a concert or you go to a comedian or a movie or something like that, that's a group effort too. If the people show up in a horrible mood and just sit there with their arms crossed and just meh everything, it doesn't matter how good the band is or how good the comedian is or whatever, public speaker. It's not going to be a fun experience. So the people at the table, this comes back to the thing, you're a player too. You're in a specialized role, but you're a player just like your players. You're all working together to have a good time. And as I put it in this blog post I wrote up and never published, I'll get around to it. It's a consensual hallucination with dice. And your players are rooting for you because they're rooting for themselves to have a good time. All right. So that's such a powerful, powerful, force, if you will, at work in the game. The players want to have fun. So they're going to work with you, to a great extent to make sure everybody has fun, or to make sure they have fun. If they're having fun, that helps other people have fun, and et cetera, et cetera. So here's another very powerful, topic's the wrong word, guideline, I guess, a powerful, aspect of being a DM. And this one is so important. I would say it's probably equally as important as the one about everybody who's there to have fun. The players, listen to this, so important. The players don't know what you intended to happen. And they have no idea if you screwed up, unless you just say, oh, I screwed up. Or you're running a pre-written module and somebody at the table knows the pre-written module, which is a big no-no anyway. So that shouldn't be happening. So again, the players don't know what you intended to have happen. They have no idea. Just keep going when you do mess up. And you will mess up. You will. You'll probably mess up at least once a session, if not more. So like a lot of entertainment, a good part of D&D or tabletop role-playing, whatever you're playing, is really smoke and mirrors and letting the players fill in the blanks with their imagination. Another very important concept. You'd probably be surprised with the picture they're painting in their heads compared to what you think you're painting there. So, just keep going. Now, if you just really messed up and it's just obvious and everything is just terrible, just say, hey guys, I messed up. We're going to reset and whatever. And that happens too. But so often, they won't even know you messed up unless you admit it. So for the sake of the story, just keep going. They don't even know. So as a disclaimer from the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide puts it, and this is, funny, but there's a couple of nuggets of truth in here. It says, disclaimer, Wizards of the Coast does not officially endorse the following tactics, which are guaranteed to maximize your enjoyment as a Dungeon Master. First, always keep a straight face and say, okay, no matter how ludicrous or doomed the player's plan of action is. Second, no matter what happens, pretend that you intended all along for everything to unfold the way it did. Boom. Third, if you're not sure what to do next, feign illness, end the session early, and plot your next move. When all else fails, roll a bunch of dice behind your screen, study them for a moment with a look of deep concern, mixed with regret, let loose a heavy sigh, and announce that Tiamat swoops from the sky and attacks. Like I said, that's a joke, but there's some truth there. All right, and finally, before we get to how do you know if you're a good DM or not, I think an important point is you've got to find your personal style for DMing as far as how much to prepare or not prepare, or to run, homebrew versus pre-written modules or whatever. And every DM's a little bit different. What works best for me is I don't prepare to the point where I've got every little thing memorized, and I don't ignore it to the point where I have no idea what's going to happen. The best way I can explain it, it's like when I do public speaking, I don't write out a full speech, and I also don't go in unprepared. I just write some bullet points and take it from there. And that's what works really well for me. And you won't really know what your approach is until you've DM'd or GM'd for quite a while. And then you'll figure out what works best for you. But if you hear other people saying, oh, you got to spend 3 hours per hour of game time, I mean, that's meaningless because that's not your personality. So just do what works for you. Okay, and here we go with a big drum roll. How do you know if you are a good DM or GM or whatever you call it? It's truly simple to figure out. Now, you could ask your players, and you'll get varying answers, which may or may not reflect the truth, human nature being what it is. You can compare yourself to other DMs, which I don't recommend within reason. I mean, see what they're doing that seems to work and not, but don't make that the measure. Assessing whether your players seem to be having fun on any given session can be hit or miss because one session is not a measure of the ongoing game as a whole. So never measure whether you have a good campaign going by just one session. Here it is. This is foolproof. All right. The most accurate, easiest, and most convincing measure of if you are a good DM is this. Here we go. Pay attention. Do your same players keep coming back on their own accord, not because of peer pressure or other factors, but because they want to every week for more? That's it. The behavior of your players over time is the most trustworthy metric. If they keep coming back consistently on their own, congratulate yourself. You are a good DM. If not, it's time to possibly review what you're doing and alter your approach. So there you go. That's my best advice and my best way to measure on being a good DM. I hope it was helpful. I'd love to have your feedback. Tweet me at Shane Plays, ShanePlays. And then finally, to end the show, I've got the bad joke of the week. Here we go. I apologize. No, I don't apologize in advance. I love inflicting this pain. I just went to an emotional wedding. Even the cake was in tears. Oh, yeah, baby. That one hurt so good. We'll catch you next time on Shane Plays.
Hey, nice timing, your shortness. Where were you when we needed an exterminator?
There are many matters that require my attention, Cavalier. A dungeon master's life is not an easy one.
Don't give me that. You've got tons of power and you never even use it. Boy, if I were dungeon master, I'd have it made.
What an interesting proposition. And it's true, I could use a little rest. Very well, Cavalier. I accept your offer.
Shane Plays Radio is blessed to have sponsors, and we appreciate them very much. However, did you know that you can also support the show as an individual for as little as $1 an episode? Simply go to patreon.com/ShanePlays.